Welcome everyone. My name is Darshan Doshi. I'm the founding director for the Flame Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Welcome Sagar. Thanks a lot for joining us on a Wednesday evening. Really looking forward to this session. Before I get into the topic and introducing Sagar, just wanted to run through a couple of announcements. We started Founders Talk series a couple of months ago, and the aim was to bring in entrepreneurs such as Sagar Apte, investors, educators, and business leaders who are interacting and working with startups, right? So it is either got to do with right from product development to investing to acquisition to how do you shortlist your business ideas. We've had all of these sessions so far, and we've got a few more lined up over the next few weeks as well. So a quick announcement, the Flame Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation runs various initiatives. We run an incubator program, the applications for which are open for anybody to look at it. We've partnered with Campus Fund. Campus Fund looks at investing in student-led startups, anywhere up to 50 lakhs to a crore, to help them move the needle. And we also run a startup accelerator program, which is an equity-free, tuition-free program. This is for early stage startups who have a ready product and who have maybe a few customers to all the way, revenues up to 1 crore. So 19 startups have gone through this accelerator program. Due to COVID, both the incubator program and the accelerator program are going to be run virtually for the next few months. And if anyone you know, or if you yourself are interested in becoming a part of this, you can just go to flame.edu.in, and under Center for Entrepreneurship, you'll find those application details. The application deadline is on September the 20th. That is a month from now. And on another side, what we've also done is we've launched a 1-year postgraduate program in entrepreneurship. This is for people who may have an idea or may not have an idea, but by the end of the 1 year, they want to help answer, am I in the right state to launch a business? Does my business idea have legs? And am I the right person to build this kind of a business? Right. So in this 1 year, if you can answer these 3 questions, I think it could save you a lot of heartache, money, and time. And so this is what we've done in partnership with Wadhwani Foundation, Babson College, Your Story, amongst many other partners, right? So applications are open. We are just going to close these applications in the next 10 days. So if you know anyone who might be interested, please do join us. Now, moving on to today's session. Today's session is a fantastic session that I'm really looking forward to. I've known Sagar for a few years. When I joined as head of operations at GeoGenNext, Sagar was going through the accelerator program over there. And his company at that time, CarIQ, was a device, an IoT startup. And I'll let him share the whole history of how it has evolved. But today's discussion is around acquisition. Okay, there are 2 challenging parts. One is launching a startup, growing a startup, and then thinking about selling a startup. Now, people who started businesses in 1970s and 80s probably didn't think about selling their company. But today, the VC capital coming in and the startup landscape, we are seeing acquisition be a big part of a startup, right? Or a startup journey or an entrepreneur journey. And we want to just walk through this, and who better than person who has gone through this recently. And Sagar, built CarIQ, and then it got acquired by Varroc. And he's going to share some his thought process and what goes into, thinking about the acquisition process. So a quick introduction of Sagar. Sagar is from Pune. He's the founder and CEO of CarIQ. He's had 20 plus years experience in product management and marketing. He has worked in various startups and large organizations such as Ruxum, Symantec, Pubmatic. He started CarIQ in 2013, and he built India's first connected car platform. Today, CarIQ is the leading solution provider for usage-based insurance in India, with installations across enterprises in India and Sri Lanka. It was acquired by Varroc, a global automotive component company with presence in over 5 countries. He's an avid reader of history and he loves driving. So all over to you, Sagar. Thanks a lot for joining us and looking forward to this awesome session.
Okay. Thanks, Darshan. And hi, everyone. This is definitely a new format for me. Since I can't see any of you, but you all can see me. So, okay, so let's get started. So, let me just give you like a 1-minute thing on CarIQ. So that will kind of help you connect as to what I'm talking about. CarIQ is a connected car platform. Essentially, we get data from vehicles to the cloud and then analyze that data and make specific business cases possible. A business case could be for an insurance company to identify safe drivers, thereby rewarding them. It could be a large fleet owner who wants to drive safety, wants to improve safety of the drivers and the vehicles and the goods or the passengers. Or it could even be an OEM who wants to bring a superlative experience for his customers. He may want to stay connected with his customers even after the sale of the product, and then continue to help a customer better use his product. On all these use cases, a connected vehicle platform kind of comes into play, and that's what we did and what we've been building for a while, right? So we were acquired by Varroc last year. It's exactly a year this month. So last year in August, we were acquired. And we went through our own phases like most startups do. So while we are talking, I'll request to put out those 2 questionnaires, the survey questions, just to get a better feel of what type of audience is there today. Want to know if there are tech software company people here or non-tech guys. And the second thing is, are you thinking of an acquisition at this time? So the questions were to help me also kind of divide this whole thing into three phases, right? First is pre-acquisition. Are you ready for one? Do you want to get acquired today, right? The second is, what do you do during acquisition? And then third is, of course, post-acquisition, how things are going to roll and how do you want to take a look at it, right? So let's look at pre-acquisition, right? Almost, there's always this popular saying, it's business, it's not personal, right? But believe me, acquisition is more personal than business, right? You started something from scratch and you want to now take a decision whether you want to sell it. And it can be pretty unique. So let me give you an example there, right? Through 7 years of CarIQ pre-acquisition, my mom might have not missed a single chance to tell me, why did you have to leave a job and start this thing? And she probably never missed a chance to tell me that. Of course, she supported me, but she continued to say, did you really have to leave the job to start a company? So one day I finally went to my mom and said, so mom, we've decided to sell the company and we're getting acquired. My mom tells me, oh, do you want money to continue working? You don't need to sell this, okay? We can, if you need money, I can break some FDs and give you the money. The same person who's asking me to not do this for 7 years suddenly now says, oh, if there's a problem, don't, you know? And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's a business decision, but it is that personal. It can be that personal, right? To understand whether you want to sell a company or not, right? So before you want to, when you're going through this whole pre-acquisition mode, okay, you're really thinking of 3 things. You want to know what to sell, you want to know when to sell, and you want to know whom to sell this to, right? So let's take all these 3 one at a time, right? So when you say what to sell, what are you essentially, at the end of the day, you're always selling, right? When you have an ESOP pool, what do? You sell a part of your company, right? Maybe you're a single founder, then got more founders on board. What did you do? You sold your vision and in exchange of shares for others to come on board. You're always selling, right? And in terms of acquisition, probably you're selling the whole thing off now, right? But you're still selling, right? And The only difference between the two is you're usually selling a vision when you're getting your first initial co-founders along or your first employees along. But when you're selling the company off, I personally believe it could be one of these three things. You could be really selling people, which is usually acqui-hire. You just build a fantabulous team of people, very unique, and somebody else needs to improve or increase their team size, is looking for someone. The other is technology. You build something superlative, something fantastic, and that's not available right now, that you would be acquired for the technology piece of it. And then the third is the market, the customer base that you acquire, that makes essentially something that that some other company might be missing out. And it actually is in these three phases, right? You get the least valuation for acqui-hire. At the end of the day, it is really a multiplier of the people, their industry standard salaries, probably add 33% on top of it. And then whatever you're able to negotiate for the time to kind of get this whole thing going, right? But beyond that, at the end of the day, if you're getting acquired only for the people, it's usually the least money that you would make. I would still go for it. It's always, something is always better than nothing, but that's how it is. The second thing that where you could really make money is when somebody is acquiring you for technology, right? A technology piece that's not available outside, right? I could just think of Haptik by Reliance as an example, where Haptik had a very specific technology in the AI space, which Reliance didn't have. And it was more for the technology. People, Reliance could have hired them, right? The same team could have come back and worked for Reliance, right? The third was market. Reliance has a far faster reach to get to the market, right? But it was a technology piece. There's hard work. There are mistakes that are made that never come out. Your code doesn't, you delete the code that is making mistakes, right? So what is left is the pure code. The mistakes are only in your brain. It's the end result that is critical. So technology is a good example. Or the third thing where you get the highest value is usually the market or the customer base that I want to get to, but I don't have access to, right? So the recent White Hat Junior by Byju's is a good example there. One might question that it might be the model, but not really, right? One could use Zoom also to start teaching kids online. It was their unique space where certain children needed one-to-one guidance instead of a self-help kind of a field, and ability to kind of get those teachers, train them, make them ready to get onto this medium. That really was the space, and that's why they commanded that kind of money within just a 1.5 year time frame, right? But that's the what. What are you really selling? And you as a company would know what you are really selling, right? If you're looking for a technology sale, then you're obviously going to look for companies who can consume your technology part. And if you're looking for a market space, then you're going to look for white spaces. White spaces essentially means is that I'm working in a certain space. The immediate parallel space is what I want to get into, right? You hear lots of such examples. White Hat is just one of them. I was just thinking of U Broadband being acquired by Vodafone, which is non-tech, but a very, very different space, which as a telecom, Vodafone would have wanted to get into one way or the other. That's how they kind of looked at it, right? So that's the what of what you want to sell, and you would be more clear on what you really want to sell from your company, right? But the next part is when to sell, right? Sure, I want to sell this, but, and that's really a very, very personal decision, right? When we decided to kind of get acquired, this thing happened, we were having a conversation, we said, okay, there is a deal on the table, do you want to consider this, right? That's the when that comes in. How do you see the market forces changing, right? So when CarIQ started, we were definitely India's first connected vehicle platform. And we thought, we could take this to OEMs, we could take this to every vehicle out there. But you have to understand the market space that you are in, and that you get to know a lot of times after you entered the space, right? And we realized after getting into the space that this particular vertical was where relationships matter. You've been working with somebody for 20 years. A newbie can't just come in and push that person out. Extremely, extremely difficult. And with the area where it is very difficult to explain what a product is versus a customized software development to a non-tech company, everybody is like, I could build it. Very difficult to explain. No, there must be something unique we might have built over the last 4 or 5 years, right? Could you build it? Absolutely yes, but it will take time and it will take mistakes. So would you not like to avoid those, right? Somehow the Western world countries which do acquisition seem to better understand this. They put a time, there is a cost to time. There is a very, very valid, uh, calculatable time that the value that they put on time. Here we don't. Somehow we feel everything can be built. Everything is just a matter of time. कल आज नहीं तो कल हो जाएगा बस. If I'm able to save some money in between, why not save that, right? And you can see so many examples, right? We would opt to go the length versus investing some money and having a better quality of life, right? We would just rather want to spend more time somehow. That's how it is. For us, it was very clear. It was crystal clear that if we wanted to take our product to the next level, acquisition was in the best interest of the company. Really, for us, the decision was more done for the sake of the company than ourselves. We had built something brilliantly beautiful, and we thought that the best chance for it was to take it to the next level. Like you would want if all the parents out there would probably want your children to go to the US and learn. Are you sending them away? Yes. Could have done the same course in India? Absolutely yes. But you somehow feel that's probably acquisition for you. You decided which is your child, to go outside. In that case, probably you also fund the acquisition. In this case, we got paid for the acquisition, but you would you get the idea, right? So that's the when you want to kind of be ready for. But the most critical is whom, right? There'll be enough competitors who might want to acquire you. There might be other partners who want to get into this space who you would want to partner with. And I think spending some meaningful period of time with the acquisition, especially if it's not an acquire, it's probably fine. But if you really want to take this technology, you're getting into an acquisition because you have a certain technology for which you find more applications, then you want to be sure your vision and this acquirer's vision kind of align, at least to a large extent, right? There will be some things that you will do uniquely, there's no doubt, but do your visions at least align? Do you both understand what you're really doing? And I think most of those failed acquisitions happen there. They are really thinking of acquiring you for the technology and I will figure out how to sell is usually the mindset. And they don't realize that you really can't sell. You don't know the product. I've been living and breathing this product for the last 7 years, right? So you want to be sure that your vision, where this needs to be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line, matches with these people. Even if you yourself have decided not to be around for 5 years, let's say you have decided that you don't want to be around for 5 years, but you're still going to be there for the next 2 years, 3 years, right? And if you think, hum kar lenge, hota nahi hai, you will have to be sure that their vision and your vision also aligns. And that is the whom part of it. At CarIQ, we really treated it like a sales process. We created an Excel sheet as if we were going behind a set of investors. We listed all the names of companies whom we could go and pitch our product to and who would be interested in our product. And we also found out the decision makers. We made sure we are directly talking to the decision makers. Another thing, at least in Indian context, anyone below the decision maker is probably not the right person to talk to. You have to talk to the decision maker, because if he doesn't have the vision, then it's not going to matter. However, you might just be wasting your time talking to somebody below a decision maker. You have to talk to the decision maker who understands this, right? So we kind of listed that. We went through our own process of meeting them, talking to them. Some places our visions were completely disparate. Some places visions matched, but the path to the vision didn't match. And then we were lucky. It is literally like a marriage, right? You have to see as many partners, spouses to be able to come to the final decision. Very few on the first meeting meet their life partner, and good luck to them. But most normal people would have at least met 10, 15 of them. You will have to do the same. You'll have to meet enough people before you get there, right? So that's your pre-acquisition stage. And hopefully there'll be some questions. So while we move to the next stage where we talk about specifically how do you deal with the acquisition path itself or the acquisition period, I have one more question for you. What do you think is your strength? What do you think? Is it people? Is it technology? Or is it a market? And this is critical. If you're just starting off on your startup journey, I really beseech you to think of this question. If you're just putting a great, fantastic team together, know this, that probably you're not planning 2 steps ahead. If you can think of a specific customer base and then have that as your anchor point, nothing like it. And I think the most successful acquisitions have been where the founders have had a very, very clear sense of a customer base. Even probably they pivoted in between, but they had a very, very clear sense of the customer base, right? So let's start talking about the acquisition period, right? It's really a mental game. If any of you here have gone through a fundraise, it's very similar. If you can remember your first job interview and waiting for the time period to hear back from them, and you go through multiple interviews rounds, right? So it's almost like that. You always thinking of multiple multiple things, and it is very, very important that you have a very clear mindset. There are different kinds of advices. When we decided to, we had a very solid deal in place, we went and actually spoke to a few founders who had gotten acquired in the last 6 months. Rishikesh, my co-founder, and myself, we actually went and met these 4 or 5 startup founders whom we knew, and they had been acquired in the last 6 months to a year kind of a time period. And we sat with them, we got a set of questions: what do you do, what do you handle? We got a bunch of different feedback, right from keeping it as secret as possible to going all the way, being candid about it across the world. I think we took a little bit of a middle path. First, we went and made sure all the stakeholders, like everybody who owned the share, be it ESOP, be it co-founders, be it the investors, we made sure we had told them what we are planning, why I think this is a good idea, why we should go ahead with it. So we made sure they were on board first. We also made sure we told them multiple times that this might fail, this might break, this might not go through, because that's a big challenge. If that doesn't go through, then somehow people start blaming you for a deal that was never probably going to happen in the first place. So we made sure we kind of did both the things. We set expectations why we are doing this, and we also set expectations this might not happen. So please don't blame me if this doesn't go through, right? The next step we did was we definitely went and told our team this is happening. Again, the same kind of message that we gave to the investors, because we felt they were also invested in this whole thing. They had invested their time, they had believed in us, and we wanted to make sure we were very sure we are not doing an acquire hire. We said we found a partner who wants to continue with the product and take it to the next level. If anything, it will throw more good challenges at us to take this to the next level. And we were very sure we wanted to retain our market, especially the insurance place. So we were looking for a partner who also believed in this space. So for us, it worked out, luckily. But this was not the first thing. We had spoken to multiple others while we kind of zeroed in on a particular company that we wanted to go with, which is Varroc. Then the third thing we did, which is probably the best decision, was we went and got a good set of lawyers. We worked with Legalogic. They're pretty popular in Pune. And Vivek and Vikas were phenomenally helpful. They've gone through these steps so many times. I think we got better advice. We got very good advice from them. Me and Rishi are very sure it wouldn't have been that successful and that thing for us without Vivek and Vikas kind of being there. And you need to find a lawyer who's gone through this process for a type of company that you have, so they can give you the best advice and also be able to have a conversation with the other company on your behalf. Because see, at the end of the day, you have to understand that you're getting married into that house. You can't go very aggressive against them, because they'll find that, oh, he's so difficult that we might not be able to work with him. And yet you need to be able to, get the best deal for yourself. It's a very, it's almost like negotiating a salary, right? You don't want to be so pushy that you don't get the job offer in the first place, but at the same time, you don't want to kind of, you want to get the best deal for yourself and your investors and your company, right? And they're a good set of lawyers like Legalogic can really help you do that. And then the fourth thing is, your family members and anybody who's I'll try and refrain from using the word suffered, but it is usually you're having fun because you're going through this, and it's usually suffering for the poor family because they are like, okay, what's going on here, right? So making sure they are also a part of this process, with the caveat that this might not work. I don't know why I always keep coming up to that. I always keep using that. But with that caveat made, at least worked for us really well. Because there are times when you don't hear from the other party. Like it would be like weeks, you haven't heard. And then, okay, did we lose the deal? Is it over? Oh, what's really happening here? You know, we aren't hearing back. You go through the same pangs that you would go through a fundraise. But that's what happens, right? And you'll come out of it. You'll come out of it. But my best advice would be to definitely talk to others who've gone this path, right? And a legal team to assist you. Then let's talk briefly for 2 minutes before we open up for Q&A, and Darshan's already looking at me. So the post acquisition period. Be sure why you're getting acquired, right? If you're really fed up of this whole thing, I would request you to be upfront about this to the acquirer, saying, look, I've gone through this, and most likely they're going to understand this, that yeah, there is if you build a good technology product, you got a good team to support and take it to the next level, they will understand. But be sure what you want to do post that. It is very, very important. It is very important you are very clear, your co-founder is very clear, your team is very clear why you are doing this acquisition from a mindset standpoint, right? Second thing is, you read a lot of articles on failed acquisitions and successful acquisitions. And while most articles point that, you know, you can't clap with a single hand, both teams need to come together and all this, we took the path where we said, we are like a daughter-in-law getting into a new house. Okay, it is my responsibility, mine and Rishi's responsibility to make this work. We have to maintain our people's expectations. We'll have to maintain the acquisition company's expectations, and it is my responsibility. We were very sure. We had signed up for it on day one. We said, this is my responsibility, right? That helped a lot, because then there was no questions. If we had to take some extra effort, call a few extra more people and explain to them what my product is all about, it was a given, because we had mentally absolutely signed up for it, right? And we were very clear, we wanted to make this bigger by being a part of a larger company. For us, it was there. We were very sure. We were by no means tired with the industry. If you're running a marathon, at the end of the marathon, you will be happy and you will be tired. So we were happy and we were tired. But that by no means meant we'll not run our next marathon. We were very sure we wanted to run our next marathon, and we were mentally prepared for it. But you'll have to take onus. You'll have to be very sure that there will be a lot of challenges post-acquisition to make this thing work, right? There will be people who don't understand your product. There will be people who don't understand your technology. And there will be you who don't understand the market. There will be you who will say, why can't this work? And they might say, no, this doesn't work like this in our industry, right? A big company culture will come in, and you'll have to be sure how you manage your team and this larger organization to kind of build something in between. You'll have to act like a buffer, because think of it, right? All along, your developers have called you on a first name basis. They'll continue to call you. But now you go into a company where even a senior manager is called sir. So you are sitting in a meeting, your whole team calls you on a first name basis. You request the other company also to call you on a first name basis, but there's probably a junior guy sitting next to you who's called sir. And you're like, okay. And you will accept it because you made up your mind, but it is difficult for your team sometimes to understand. And you need to help them. Your job is to help your team travel and transition into this new phase, and also help the new company to understand what you can do. And if you have built processes in the past, nothing like it. It will really, really help you. So with that, I will take a pause, open up for any questions. And I don't know how we're doing on time. I just like
No, I think we are perfect on time, Sagar. I think that was amazing to hear. Okay, I have a whole lot of questions prepared, but then we also are getting few questions. So all of you feel free to ask any questions and I'll pull them up. The first question for you, Sagar, is, how do you make up your mind to say, look, I want to now sell, right? When you thought about it, right? What was going on emotionally, as well as from a business standpoint? Now, first of all, let's take a step back and say, what were you trying to build? Right? You're trying to build an IoT startup in an Indian market, right? Uh, and that is, really, really far down, considering, when we are talking about 2013, right? So you are well ahead. You are obviously very well ahead on the technology end, but then the market had to catch up to what you were offering, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can first give a little bit of context in terms of, where Car IQ was and what was the journey. And then you personally, how you were feeling when you said, okay, you know what, I think now is the time, and it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So we started off to build the first connected car platform, and we didn't realize at the time, but we really built 4 companies in a way. We built a hardware company which built the whole hardware from scratch. We built a platform company which built an IoT platform. Managed services came in a little later towards the end of 2013, and they were not affordable. They never came in time for us. There is no standard off-the-shelf IoT platform. They came in around 2015-16. So we had to build a platform company. So we had to build a platform from scratch. We were a mobile company because at the end of the day, nobody sees the hardware. It just sends data to a cloud. Nobody sees the cloud because it processes the data. At the end of the day, you have this whole mammoth engine to work with the mobile app kind of a thing. And then fourth, you're running a services, you're running a very strong operations. Luckily for me, I found the right set of co-founders. Rishi came in with the technology and the platform. Co-founder Deepak Thomas kind of owned everything on making us look sexy. He kind of, the whole consumer business, making our apps look better, the communication, he kind of took over. We had Kumar who looked after the complete hardware business, the development of hardware and the firmware. And then Vinu helped with most of the operations stuff to kind of bring it to the next level. So so it needed 5 co-founders to build. A lot of people used to first ask me, what are you 5 co-founders doing, But we didn't realize we were actually building 5 different companies in a way. And we started building that. Went through our own challenges around the hardware. And probably around 2015, Rishi is one of the most objective people I've met, and is one of the most objective among the co-founders also. So finally he said, are we a hardware company or are we a platform company? Okay, we had both sets of people in the company. We realized we can't win the hardware game at that point in time, 2015. So we've already invested, all the fundraisers finished. There's no money in the bank. We've put it into building a hardware and a platform. And now we are saying, the hardware is not what our strength really is. Because in 2013, imported device which we used to cost 15,000 rupees. We started manufacturing it at almost 4,000 rupees in the next 1.5 years. And by the time our 1.5-2 years happened, China was bringing them at 3,000 rupees into the market. What do you do? So fine, that was the first emotional burden. I think that was for me, because I built that hardware from scratch. For me, letting go of that child was more difficult than letting go of the company. So I took my own sweet time, almost 6 months, to say, yes, let's get rid of the hardware. We'll become a platform company. But we did that, right? And then we became a platform company, 2016. And then around 2017-18, we find Microsoft and Amazon and PTC all with IoT platforms now, with the IoT world being prevalent, now suddenly competing with us for the same deals. We built our platform on Azure Stack, on IBM Stack, and now we're competing against them because they had figured out how to build an IoT platform. And by this time, they had probably amortized whatever investments they had in Europe and US and had now started entering the Indian market context, right? So we realized that we had a good set of technology. We had a good set of people who could manage this technology. And we had entered into the insurance space, but to be very honest, that spike was still missing. We needed access to the market. And that is when this whole conversation around acquisition and the right company to open up access started. And we realized somebody who works with OEMs is the right company for us. Anybody who sells to OEMs can take us along. And if he's building a hardware, nothing like it, he can load our stack on top of the hardware and take us along. So from a business standpoint, it was not such a difficult decision, to be honest. So because we had gone through our own curves, we had money, we had lost money, we had made money, we had lost money. So that all justification was already there. Business-wise, it was very clear. Sitting with somebody like Varroc, who's listed, who's got presence across 5 countries, 40 manufacturing factories, it was a no-brainer, right? The emotional angle was always there, right? Could we still make it out on our own? We just started, scratching the surface. I remember I was we had just closed a deal with an insurance company in Mumbai, and me and one of my earliest members, Swapnil, we were both walking out, and that's when I told him we have an offer to get acquired, and I'm considering it. And he said, "Nahi, ab to bechna hi nahi hai. What a fantastic meeting. We got our golden customer there. We're just going to grow." So very, very, different mindsets. Are you getting customers? Yes. Are you becoming successful? Yes. Are you profitable? Yes. Should we just still pull this rubber band a little bit more and cross the valley? There is no right or wrong answer. We looked at our investors. We really reached out to everybody who wanted to share in CarIQ and asked them, what would you do? What do you want me to do? It has to be a collective decision. If it is my vision, I might probably end up running it into the ground by trying to still become successful. You tell me what do you want. And majority wise, most agreed that it's the right time to exit, and we kind of took it.
Excellent. I've seen you right through from, I think, 2016, right? And it has always been, I've always found you to be tremendously objective, right? Of course, you need to have the balance between managing stakeholders and then your own way of working and then your team, right? I think that balance, getting that balance is a continuous learning for a founder, right? We'll not talk about that. But also when it comes to stakeholders, valuation becomes a big challenge, right? I'm sure, there have been conversations around valuation. So what can you share, if you are willing to share, right? As to how did you think about valuation? What was the breaking point for some of the valuations, right? Whether it was acqui-hire, acquisition, or whatever that you might want to think. Because right now I'm talking to quite a few startups, and COVID-19 has been a tough time for many startups, even funded ones. And many times I'm seeing that while they've understood the business reality that there's no revenue coming in, when it comes to acquisition, they kind of get blocked or stuck at valuation because they're still in the pre-COVID era. Right? Yes. So maybe you can share your own experience, because whether it was COVID or no COVID, I think it's an approach to valuation, right? So would love to hear your thoughts on it.
So I'll walk you through how we decided what the valuation should be, and then also how there's no right and wrong answer. So whatever, I'm telling you the answer and then saying it's probably not the right answer. Okay. So first we decided a baseline number, to be very honest. Okay. We saw how much time and efforts we as co-founders had invested. And we said, for us to recover the money and a little bit extra on top of it, what is that number? We all knew our salaries, we knew where we would have been. So it was very easy to come to that number, very easily. Second was, now if I sell at this number, will my investors make money? Because every investor wants every of his investment to give him 20x, while acknowledging only one is going to be out of 10. That's why I want 20x, but somehow he wants all 10 to also become 20x. So it's always there, right? So we had this whole thing, right? So we knew we had a baseline number below which we will not do the deal. We knew that. It was easy to calculate the way I mentioned. We just said, this is my time and effort that I've put. This is the bare minimum one would expect. Anything below it, fair investment in this startup. Okay, the next one has to then give the returns. But if this one has to give the return, then this is the number. It was simple. Then we went and adjusted it, adjusted the number to go a little higher to make sure all our investors are also happy with the number, at least presentable and acceptable to the investors. Now, investors, the first investor is always happy, right? Because he makes most of the money. It's always the last, the most recent one who's come on board. Because really, if you think of it, you're given the same vision to the last investor that you give to the first one who came on board, right? The first one who came on also, you said you will hit this market scale. And the last one who came also, you will say you will hit that market scale in the same proportion, really, from 0 to X and then X to some other number. But now you're not going from X to Y for the last guy, right? So going back to this particular guy and convincing him is probably the most critical thing, saying, sorry, but it's not going to Y, but it's come only this much. And we need to exit out. It's a sale. It's absolute sale to go and explain to him the market dynamics, right? So it's very interesting when you're at your, so for us, it was like, we were going through a hard phase, and some of our investors had like given up and came to me saying, look, we don't mind investing even at the principal amount that we put, but we would love to exit. One of them said a haircut is also fine, but I don't want to, we would just like to exit. Because everything is happening in his own life, in his own business, and he would want to now exit. Most investors sometimes think it's like a stock market, mein thoda loss leke write off karega, but it's a startup. Somebody has to be willing to buy your shares in the first place. That's where we were. Then we got this deal, so we came to like a next point. So they were all happy because within like 2 months of this announcing this, we were like had an offer in hand. Then within 2 months, while this whole conversation was happening, most of them felt, we could have made more money. Okay, so you have to still hold them through this whole process. Then the deal happened. They all said, okay, fine, ho gaya. At least we all made money. So they were all happy. Then about 2 months later, they start hearing about Reliance acquiring this guy, that guy acquiring that guy, this guy. They feel, oh shit, we could have made more money. So I actually got mails. I got WhatsApp message, we could have made more money. Then COVID strikes, and everybody's again sending messages, oh, thank God we sold last year. I don't think we would have got a valuation. So there's really no right and wrong answer. This is like a bell curve going through it. I think the best thing is for you to be sure that this is the baseline number and you got to hit that number. It has nothing to do with Corona. It has nothing to do with pre-COVID. It is your effort is where it is. I think if you are trying to sell to a US market, so it depends on what you're selling. If you're selling people, then it is a multiplier of the value of the people. If you're selling technology, then it is your effort and what the multiplier it should be. If it is the market, then you have something in your hand. You can say, I have 100 customers. Each customer is worth 100 rupees, and so 100 into 100 is my valuation. That reasoning might really work if you're selling from a niche market or a customer base standpoint. Again, outside India, within India, they'll say, okay, instead of giving you 100 rupees, I'll acquire the customer in 50 rupees. They just don't understand it is not so easy to acquire the customer. You'll probably spend 200 rupees in acquiring a customer whom I'm selling at 100. But that's business for you, right?
Yeah. It's a funny thing that you keep saying, right? I mean, in India, build versus buy typically says, right?
Yeah.
Main kar dega, right? So, okay, so we have some questions. I'm just going to bring them to you, right? This is from Mohit Agarwal. What and how much is investors' participation, interest, and authority? Like, I'll just modify this and broaden it a little bit. Did you experience any investors showing authority? And you've always mentioned, right, in this talk so far, that you carried them along, right, where you got their opinion, you've really managed them well, and it's a skill, right? It's a stakeholder management skill. So maybe just something that you might have heard or your own experience, right? So what is their participation, investors' participation and authority?
No, very high, very high. They can actually make or break the deal. Usually, like every other business deal, it eventually comes down to egos. You have to manage the ego of the person more than the deal itself, right? So think of it, right? Most of startup investors, I'm not talking about at a scaled up startup, I'm talking about an early stage startup, would have put very low amount, which even if it is lost, most investors will not really mind losing the money. It is more that they made the wrong decision is what is hurting them more than the money itself. That's usually the case. Now with the company law and everything, even one investor is one share can kind of create trouble for you. So managing investor, their expectations, and having a buy-in is absolutely important. Now, I've had investors when we were going through a bad phase have called me and said, don't worry about the money. I know what I've gotten into. So really don't worry. And that gives you hope, that pushes you into a new direction, saying we should do this, right? So having said that, you can't afford to bring your ego into the picture. You cannot afford to say, he's an investor, I'm getting him in return. How is, X better than, worse than zero? Otherwise, we were almost going to go burst. You don't have time for that kind of emotional outbursts when you're managing this thing. You have to be the mature one, and you have to manage the relationship, and you have to honestly present whatever the condition is. And 99% of rational people will accept this thing. One of the things that you should also look for is within your investors, there will be a few of them who are usually influencers, where the other investors look to them. And it is very important you have a buy-in from them. And if somebody is looking up to them, usually they are experienced, which means they know they've probably gone through this process in the past, and they usually are very supportive of these deals. I have not come across other examples also where investors have not been supportive of an exit happening. They are always happy to exit, right? Unless anybody brings egos into the picture, and egos do come into the picture, you make sure you leave your ego out of the room as a founder, and it all works out.
Excellent advice. I'm advising this startup which is in the process of getting acquired, right? And it's one of those sectors which has been really adversely impacted by COVID-19. So not an easy recovery in the next 2 to 3 years. And really, the founder just wants to give a new house to the team, right? Because of a lot of care. And the investors are pretty much reasonable to say, well, I'll take 50 cents to $1, right? And if we can get that, then that's a good enough scenario. But also the question comes over here, like you said, about egos, right? Ultimately, also the ego of the acquirer, right? So how do you look at it when, or in case of Varroc, right? You said there has to be a vision alignment, right? But what happens, or have you heard based on the conversations you had with 5, 6 other startup entrepreneurs, what have been some other experiences that maybe you want to share where things were not so rosy, and it, post-acquisition, it caused problems, right? So acquisition went through, but then after that, there were a few challenges. Maybe something that you might want to share.
There are, and usually those are distress sale. And hearing to the other stories which I heard about these distress sale, and then for some problems didn't happen and for some it happened. I think the biggest difference for those for whom problem happened and for the ones for whom it did not happen was, I think the people who went into a distress sale knew they're going into a distress sale first. Second, they treated it like a business and very objectively as a business decision and not as a personal failure decision. People who went into a problem while they have done a distress sale, they somehow felt it was circumstances which have forced me to do a distress sale. And there's no COVID also, at least now you can blame on COVID. There was no COVID also, but businesses don't work out at times, and it is your choice. You could just shut it down and say, fine, nobody uses it, or you just let go of it, saying I wouldn't want to continue, but somebody else can. But if you are going to continue, then you have to take that, accept that fate, that it's a distress sale. And the people whom I kind of ran into who had a little bit of a troubled experience had refused to accept it as a distress sale. They still felt my technology is the best and I'm still worth X. But if not for that, this would not have been the case. But it is difficult. Again, my heart reaches out to the person that you mentioned who's going through this thing. And my hairs will like stand up if I imagine myself having to go through it. It is easy for me right now to smile and laugh and talk about it. My heart goes out to him. I understand what he's going through, but don't treat it personally. If you decide it's a business, and we had Car also had gone through something very similar, where we had not such a great deal. We were almost on the verge of, getting into that deal. Thank God, good sense prevailed, and we realized we will not be happy if we do the deal. We told our investors, this is a deal, this can get you some money, but if we do the deal, we are not going to be happy. We would shut it down and not, expose anyone to that thing, because the buyer is not getting what he wanted. I'm not selling what I want to sell. It's not going to happen. Good sense just prevailed for us. We were just lucky. It could have gone the other way. We would have said, okay, let me get some money out of this and then figure it out, but it never works out.
Excellent. Here's Dr. Rajesh Agarwal asking this question. What role do the founder have post-acquisition in terms of either decision-making, financial? So maybe, we'll make this even more personal. Post-acquisition, what is it that you do? How do you go about it? What does your typical day, week look like?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because all said and done, post acquisition, you are going to a large extent, you're going into a job mode, if I may say so, right? You're used to increasing somebody's salary or reducing somebody's salary at whim. Somebody just walks up to you and says, "Boss, with no problem, can you increase?" You say, "Okay, I'll see." That goes away. That superpower is taken away when you get into an acquired mode, because now you are working with someone. Even if not for someone, you're definitely working with someone, and you need to still take a decision. For me, the way I was able to work around it, by putting myself into making sure I tell myself that I'm going to be working with someone, and I have to think of him as a new co-founder along with me. That in my mental image of Varroc is my co-founder, my partner. And I did reach out to Rishi. I used to reach out to Vinu whenever any salary changes were approved or anything. Now I reach out to Varroc and talk to them. That has to be acceptable and accepted by the founders. That's one. Second thing is, I also think that at times you might feel the vision kind of meets, but the path that the other company, the culture of the other company might be completely different from from the culture that you have. For us, Rishi and I were very, very clear. I mean, in fact, at the start, we made a set of notes, which we presented to the Varroc team, saying these things are non-negotiable for us. And one of them, the first point was, we want to make sure our company culture doesn't get affected. And we gave them examples. We had to show them with examples on what culture means. And I can share that example that we shared with them. So they were saying, why don't your whole team come and start sitting with my team? And I said, look, today morning, this guy Param just went out and got kulfis for everyone. We are a team of 15 people. 15 kulfis are affordable. He could go and get kulfis. Now you're asking him to sit with 300 people. Now Param cannot afford 300 kulfis. Okay, you will ask me to have a budget for it, this is not my budget. It is just happening. And that critical piece where this team comes together and works will be lost if we go in that mode. Now, unless we are completely getting assimilated into your team and we are part of some other larger team in your company, then that will have to be managed. But if we are going to be an individualistic team, continuing to work on our product, our own market, then that's difficult. And for us, luckily, Varroc understood this. They understood our need to be a little independent, because we will not be able to do what they are able to achieve, and they will not be able to achieve what we are able to do, right? So they are able to have offsites every 6 months. We can't. Okay. But we have a 3-night overnight stay at times whenever the finances allow us, and they can't. They can't just not go outside without having a company or strategic meeting. They'll have to have a company strategic meet outside. We can just say we are going there to have fun and not going to talk about work for 3 days, and they can't do that. So you have to be sure you are able to maintain your culture if that is that important to you. For me and Rishi, it was very important. We wouldn't have enjoyed without this culture. And we were very sure. We said, if we can't enjoy, then nobody's going to be happy. So you have to make sure this happens. Yeah. Like I think Yoda told Akbar that I'll bring my Sri Krishna ka Murti along with me That is my requirement. So you have to take your culture along if it is
No,
your.
I think this is amazing. Just the fact of writing down what does culture mean, what are non-negotiables, right? And this is outside of valuation. This is outside of just a business deal, right? And this is where essentially you're saying, well, vision and everything else needs to start coming together, and both hands need to kind of come together, right? Just one question on this, and this is the last question from Deepak is how does an acquiring party decide on the valuation of the company that is going to get acquired? And you've answered the second question, which is how much say do the founders have in the decision? Obviously, right? If you don't agree on it, there's no deal. But maybe you can share a little bit on, how was the valuation process that they looked at? Did you have to negotiate? How much time maybe it took from the start of the discussion to the end of the discussion? And then once you shook hands, what was the time for the process to complete?
I think valuation is very similar to how you would price your product, right? Or how you would decide the valuation when you went for a fundraise. You have a value in your mind. In the case of acquisition, like I mentioned, we were able to calculate the value by the amount of effort taken into the number of years, kind of a thing. It is even worse when you're doing a fundraise because you've not even put the effort. You don't know how long you're going to continue with this. So how do you even come up with a value? It's even more difficult. All said and done, while there are, if you would have gone to a CA, probably he or she would have put in an Excel sheet and then told this is the value, but it practically doesn't work like that, right? Practically, you have to know what you're worth, then find a company who can afford your worth, right? And then pray that this meets. Was there negotiation? Absolutely yes. And like with the other thing, you kind of beef it up a little bit and leave some margin and buffer for your own negotiations to happen, right? Justification of valuation can happen much later, right? Justification could be as simple as saying my investor will not say yes to such a low return. Now there is no counter argument to that. So justifying a valuation is very simple. I'll say, my investors have said I need an IRR of 15% no matter what. And for this one investor to get 15% IRR, that has to be the valuation. Simple. Yeah. So it is not very complex to tell them why this is the valuation. It is really, you need to know at what point you will break, right? Or at what point you are willing to walk away. It's really as simple as that. You have to look at the market conditions, and you have to, that's why we met the other 5-6 companies, asking them, how did you decide on valuation? And none of them really decided on the valuation. It all got decided.
Excellent. So this, we are at 5:59. Maybe we'll take a couple of minutes before we wrap up. But, when people think about on both, whether to starting a business and then selling a business, right? There is a huge anxiety that gets built up on both sides, right? And what you've been able to do is to really simplify it and, be very, very authentic about it, like with a very clear approach of here's been my experience, here's how we as co-founders looked at it, here's how our investors helped us, here's how our partner became an acquirer, right? And then post-acquisition, this is something that we are looking at. So thanks a lot for that, Sagar. I wish we had more time. We typically try to start on time and then end on time as well. This has been a lovely journey. Thanks a lot for your time. For our audience members, I hope you've enjoyed. What we have is on next Wednesday, we have our next Founders Talk webinar, which is on, that's one of my daughters. So we have Dr. Anirudh Pant, who's a fantastic person, a good friend. So he's the founder and chief data scientist at Deep Tech, which is a health care startup. And then he's also the founder and CEO of Algo Analytics, which is probably one of the largest teams of machine learning people in Pune. And so he's going to conduct a session on applications of machine learning in different business verticals. So very specifically where money is being made using machine learning, how are people looking at it in India, in different parts of the world. So I've asked him to break it down to make it more actionable, more application oriented rather than technology oriented, right? So The technical bit of it, we are not going to have a lot of conversation around it, but we are going to have a lot of conversations around the business side of using this technology. So please register for that, and looking forward to seeing all of you there. Sagar, again, thanks a lot. This has been absolutely amazing, and looking forward to your support at the Center for Entrepreneurship at the Flame University.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was fun. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks. Take care.